Hey guys, this is Barrett with the Gimme Camper. So today we're going to talk about adding our third Valterra EZ Valve, the electronic valve, to our camper here. I reached out to Valterra and Dometic and told them, like, I think I have a perfect project for one of these EZ Valves if you want to send me one, and they agreed to that. So they sent it for me here. I do have a couple of other videos about these valves, and they'll all be linked in the description or up here in the corner. Now, I will say that one thing that's got on my nerves about this camper, this is a 2019 Cougar 29 RKS. But one of the things that's been on my nerves since I bought the camper is whenever you're going to dump it, it has two different dump locations, so two different exits for the sewer valves. The main one is in the front, and that's our black tank, and a gray tank, which is for our shower and our bathroom sink, and then our kitchen sink is in the back. And so there's about 10-15 feet there in between those two valves. So usually what I end up doing is when I pull up to a dump station or something, I dump the first one, then everybody behind you is like, oh, he's leaving, and you pull up about 10 feet and dump the second one. That just keeps you from getting a bunch of hoses and stuff out. Now, with that being said, last summer I actually combined the two of those drains. And so I actually look at a video that All About RVs did. It was pretty insightful. I'll link it in the description as well. But we decided to link these two together. So in our particular situation, I did want to maintain the valve to be up above the underbelly to give it some protection from freezing and stuff. Now, our second tank is a little bit different in the fact that it uses a 3-inch pipe that comes out of that and went to the drain, where a lot of them have a smaller pipe, like a 1.5 or 2-inch on the Galley tank. But I wanted to keep that 3-inch pipe because I figure what can happen, our Galley tank does fill up pretty decently fast depending on what my wife's doing in there. But I can open that valve, and we have an external Valterra valve that's just manual at the exit there, and we can leave that closed, and that gives us a decent amount of extra carrying capacity. Now, you don't want to do that on a normal day, because if it's freezing, everything that's in that pipe that's under the underbelly can freeze, and that can cause you to have issues. But in the summertime, when your tank fills up, you can let that out, have a little bit more storage capacity there till you get to the dump station. Now, when we did that, my plan was to add another EZ valve there, but I didn't have it with me at the time, so I just left the valve in the stock location. And what I ended up doing was having to use a couple of 45-degree pipe fittings to drop that pipe underneath the underbelly pretty soon to when it came out under the tank, because there was an obstruction there. I would have liked to go about halfway at least through the underbelly and then drop it down, but that just wasn't a possibility for the way that our camper was set up. Also, whenever I did these initial things before, I did have, the only leak that I had was when we were draining the tank. A couple of those 45-degree fittings where it dropped out of the camper, there was a little bit of a leak there. I didn't go back and fix it because I knew that I was going to be getting him back in it to do this, which I ended up having to replace those fittings anyway. Or I did, because I wasn't sure where exactly the leak was coming from, and it was just the easier thing to do. As far as failure from that initial install, the only other failure that I had was one of the straps that I had holding the pipe up came loose, and that was more where I was hanging under the underbelly. Almost, it was the last strap that they offered support before the drain hole. But that's the only other failure that I've had. Like I said, I didn't fix it because I knew I was going to be getting all back into this. Something I did to prepare for this install, since I didn't have the valve with me, I should have looked at the instruction manual and in our previous videos a little bit more. But you have to have 3 wires if you're going to extend the remote out. So because of that, I didn't do that. I had a black wire and a red wire, but you needed like a green wire, so you need a 3rd wire. Of course, obviously it doesn't have to be green, but that's their normal color scheme. Now, I had 2 out of 3 wires, but I didn't have the 3rd one, so I had to open a lot of spots in the underbelly. Now, I tried using like my red wire as a guide to pull a string and another wire through. That way I would have to actually pull it all the way through, and then use the string to pull the red wire back through so that all three were there. But there's so much stuff that was in the underbelly that things were getting pinched on that didn't work. I couldn't even pull it a good foot. And then whenever I got into the underbelly, because I had to open 3 or 4 areas to use a fish to push that through, I did notice that when I was pulling on that red wire, it actually got wrapped around the 2 previous Valterra valves that I had, so it would have caused issues with those moving in and out. So it's a good thing that I just didn't yank on it anymore, and I just opened it up and run the wire. Now after I got the wire run, I had to decide where I was going to mount the control, but before I did that, I was like, let's go ahead and mount this up. So I took a Sawzall and I cut the pipe pretty close to the black tank in the back. When I cut that off, I just unbolted the valve from the original flange that I had glued on there. After I did that, I unbolted the valve and took that small piece of pipe off, and that also had those 45-degree fittings on there that we talked about. So I took all that off, and then I tried mocking that EZ valve up. Now I will say that was tilted about 45 degrees. I actually thought that I might have to. There wasn't any way to get that original fitting and move it because it was glued like right at the tank. And so I couldn't like cut it off and move that fitting over. And so I actually thought I might have to leave that original valve body there and then mount the electronic valve out from it a little bit, but I didn't have a lot of space to work with. So I went down to Shelburne RV and I got some of those glue-on mounts, and I actually got 3 of them because I thought, you know, best case scenario, I just need 1 to mount to the new pipe. Worst case scenario, I'm going to have to mount those 2 valves side by side so I can turn it the direction that it needs to be in for clearance. However, if I turned it the way that the original valve was, it was going to be poking through the underbelly, so I couldn't do that. So I went for 180 degrees, and let me tell you, it fit. Now there's millimeters of clearance there. Like it touches, actually there's not really millimeters because it actually touches the bottom of the camper when it opens. It touches a cross member there. Now it appears, I've tested this many times before I sealed everything back up, and it appears that there's no like pressure on that handle when it opens all the way, but it's able to open and close, but it does touch it, and that made me a little bit nervous. But it was enough clearance where I felt like it was worth a go. I may have to get back in there and change it later, but I don't think so. One of my friends suggested that it might be an issue when the tank is full, but I did fill the tank up quite a bit during the testing here to make sure that it wasn't having a leak or anything like that. So after I got that mounted up, then I went through and I made those 45-degree fittings again where it could drop down. Now that did change the area of the underbelly that it dropped out of because it pushed it back a little bit. I also ended up having to use a rubber boot to mount that to the valve body because I didn't have a female coupler, and the actual piece that I got to bolt to the valve was more of a male. And so that wasn't working, and I thought I had a boot there just in case I needed it, and I thought we'll just do this. So I used the rubber boot, and then I dropped that pipe down and out and connected everything all back up the way it was. I did use some black spray paint to paint it because it is PVC and not ABS. You can't even find ABS pipe in my town anymore. I like everything to kind of be matching, but it's not. But it's not leaking or anything. I got it all buttoned back up. Got the whole underbelly patched. You know, if you need to patch your underbelly, it's the best system that I've used. I'll post up here, and that's using like a 1x4 to put over the seam, and then using like an extra piece of chloroplast to use as a patch and screwing it up through along the edge there, and then going around that whole thing with some silicone. You know, I've had one of those that I've had for about 30,000 miles on this camper, and it's not failed. If you just use the tape, I've had it fail within 500 miles. So then after I got that done, then I have to move to the control panel. Well, my wet bays where I wanted to mount it, the 2 original valves are mounted at the top on the side there. I didn't really have anywhere that fit the third control very well. And I noticed that the Furrion mount is right there in the wet bay where you could run like a solar into the battery bank, which is just like a connector that goes to the batteries. I've never used it. Most people don't. And so I decided I'm just going to snip that off, and I'm going to mount this switch where that is. I did have to use an oscillating saw to make that opening a little bit bigger. The other thing that was a pain was the fact that I didn't read the directions whenever I pulled the back cover off to make it the gray cover instead of the black cover. And I just pulled all those wires off there. Don't do that because it turns into a headache trying to get it back on there. You only have to remove like one of the wires and it'll pull off, but read the directions. It'll save you time. Now, after I got that all back together, I had to take like one of the older ones off and look at the wiring on it before I could actually get it back on there. But once I got all that fixed, I got it mounted in the hole there. It looks like it was there from the factory. All three of the switches are there together. They work great. And you know, I have used this on a couple of trips already, like I say, and I've not had any issue with it whatsoever. I'm not the least bit unhappy that I did this improvement, and I love only having one drain from the camper to the sewer. I like it. It works great for me. It is quite a project to do all this stuff, and you should know what you're getting into, because it took me 3 or 4 days probably all together to get all this stuff done. But I'm really happy with it. I like it. And thanks for watching the video, especially if you're still here. Be sure to tune in next week. Thanks for being part of our family, guys. We'll see you next week.
Do not forget to hit that subscribe button.